the ones who walk away from Omelas.
Well, I guess the first things first.
That's accurate.
Trolley problem. How do you feel about this trolley problem?
Yeah, so I think this is like it's a similar situation to the trolley problem, which I guess if someone doesn't know, is basically you're on a track with a trolley. You can choose to flip the switch to make the trolley either go on this path or this path. As the trolley is going, it's going to kill 5 people. You can change it to go on a different track, but if you change it, it will kill 1 person over here. And there's like different variants on numbers of people. Do you know the people? Are they young people or whatever people? But pretty much it's like, do you make the choice, even though it's a difficult choice and will hurt somebody else, to save other people?
It's kind of cool. Like we talk about trolley problem in psych classes too, where there's a huge difference in people's responses depending on the level of their agency. So a lot more people are cool with flipping a switch, but there's the variation where, what if there was a really large man, and if you push him into the line, the train's going to stop? And a lot less people choose to push the man versus the switch, no matter the outcome being the same. Which, in the context of this story, that becomes a very interesting question, just because not only are the stakes a lot higher, not just like thousands of people versus 1 person, but also a whole livelihood and a whole societal system based on the misery of this 1 person. And there's huge agency in even saving this person, which comes with clearly a lot of, how do I say it? A lot of, not shortcomings, but kind of like caveats, where it's not even guaranteed that you're saving this person, even when you do take them out. So this is like a bizarre, very bizarre moral question. I like this. I mean, obviously this is in direct, I want to say almost like, not necessarily criticism, but almost criticism to all the literature of this time that was literally just trying to tackle this same problem. Since around that time, there's utopia, dystopia everywhere in literature. He's trying to paint this utopia with this, again, obviously there's a catch, even though the author was trying really hard not to say there was a catch. There was totally a catch. But the catch is actually so minute that it's like, what do you even do kind of vibe. Like, I can't really quote the exact philosophers, but this, in the explanation of people's responses, I remember studying these epistemologies in philosophy class, but there's that philosopher that says, do nothing about life. Any action you take makes you responsible, therefore it is best to just live life in a straight path. There's a philosopher that says, stay out of everything, because attachment will cause you pain, attachment will add to the whole problem. So use the denial path, just like the people that leave. And there's a philosopher that says, love people, obviously, and do the best you can for everyone. But I don't know. This tackles a lot of cool problems.
What you mentioned about agency as being an important part of the trolley problem is pretty evident here, because the ones who walk away from Omelas don't free the kid. They just leave, because if they made that action, if they took that agency, then they would be destroying a civilization. And they're like, this is wrong, but I am not going to destroy the civilization over this injustice.
Right. But also living in a civilization is a sense of agency, because now you're an agent in the misery of this kid by not saving it.
Right.
So it's really zero agency is getting out, which I understand. I understand. A part of me really wants to put this in a very real life context, where I guess in our society, this technically is the case. Like, some people do live in a trash lifestyle for the benefits of others. And in this story, it's just 1 poor kid. It's hard to imagine. But in real life, there's millions of people, especially some countries. Some countries are this. The way we live right now is ought to be represented by one of these reactions of the people of Omelas. In a weird way, I feel like I personally fall into the people that are aware of it, feel sad about it, but don't do anything about it category. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I do feel like that is one of the main approaches to the way we already treat this kind of basically a caste system. Even though in this one, it's hard to call this story a caste system. It's just like, poor that kid. Like, no one likes that kid. But
I mean, I think that like any widespread thing can be applied to this, like factory farming or like sweatshops or child labor. It's like everybody knows that like iPhones were made with like child labor in, you know, who knows where, but like, or like your clothes from Primark were made from like sweatshops that they get like 2 cents, you know. and that animals are tortured before they're killed for meat. But, you know, most people engage in all of those things every day, and, you know, maybe that's why AirPods don't work. Luxuries.
Luxuries, dude. Oh no, AirPods hurt you.
But yeah, it's like everyone partakes in things that they know hurt. We're using the internet right now. We're using electricity that is hurting the environment, but we're doing it anyway. And it's like we could walk away from that and live in the middle of the woods.
I like that comparison, because like I really thought this person, like this kid, as like a person in real life. But yeah, this kid could functionally be the planet, considering the way we treat it, especially since there were early references to industrialism and like bombs. So maybe this is a bizarre like environmentalist to a harsh extent, but
from what I could find, this is like a direct response to utilitarianism, which was like Jeremy Bathurst and John Stuart Mill, which is basically the idea that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And so when you look at it mathematically, let's say there's 10,000 people in this town, their joy, their livelihoods, whatever, in this philosophy are worth the pain of this one child. Because when you flip it, is the happiness of this one child worth the pain of 10,000 people? It's like harder to say in that way.
That's also interesting because in reality, like it is like the few benefit while like the masses suffer. So.
Right. Now that we're talking about it, like I was curious where the word Omelas comes from. According to Wikipedia, which honestly I think Wikipedia is a very reliable source, he was driving through Oregon and he was passing by Salem, Oregon, but he saw it in the mirror. So he read it backwards as O, like O of Oregon, Omelas. So it's actually supposed to be Salem, Oregon that he got the name from. And apparently it's based on Dostoevsky, the story, which kind of puts it in a communist context. Which feel the way you feel about communism, this is an interesting perspective to it, where like, I guess in the communists, let's say like the way it worked from a critical standpoint, it was that many suffer for the benefits of few, but in the story it's vice versa. Very few suffer for the benefits of many. I don't exactly know where I'm going with this, but like there is that kind of societal idea that we're all in on this and we are all equal as long as we do this one thing.
I feel like it definitely makes sense from a utilitarian point of view. Like one child experiencing suffering is very small in comparison to every other citizen like experiencing like complete happiness. But I definitely think that like because that suffering is so solitary and so like incomparable, it becomes so much more profound because they're like suffering alone and they know they're the only person in the entire city that is suffering. And they like take on that entire suffering for the whole city. Whereas like if everybody suffers a little bit, utilitarian wise, it's worse because there's more suffering total. But it's like it's a lot easier for me to bear like 10% of the suffering than for one person to bear 100% of it.
And I like that perspective because like, you know, utilitarianism is something that everyone's in on. But when you like, in that sense, it makes absolute sense that this takes all the pain, this kid takes all the pain, and it works dandy. And honestly, like, if that is actually the case in real life right now, and I'm unaware of it, I'm not going to do anything about it, frankly. But like, from moral standpoint, I guess morals and ethics and like utilitarian ideals kind of clash. We have to all accept the fact that this kid is suffering and there's no justification for his suffering. With like sweatshops and everything, I feel like a lot of people can find ways around it where like, oh, but 2 cents is worth a lot in their country. Oh, but they have a family. Oh, but they at least have a job. This kid's suffering is inexcusable. You can't make up an excuse for this kid's suffering. I think that's the cutting part of the morals where like, you can't lie to yourself about this one. No, this kid's having a horrendous time and we all know it.
The best they come up with is like, oh, or the child must be so used to this that like they could never experience joy anyway, which to me feels a lot like the like racist ideology of that were like, yeah, slavery seems bad, but they're actually so dumb they don't think it's bad at all. And it's like that's
just like animals don't feel pain. Oh
yeah, it's just or like yeah, like they don't feel pain. Like there was a discourse that like Native Americans don't feel pain as much as white people, which is like what like it's just dehumanizing the child, different races. It's like the same thing. And yeah, it can make you feel better to lie to yourself like that, but it's not true, you know?
Yeah, I was getting racist reading as we were reading it, and then when we started talking, I kind of started also getting really direct to incarceration connections, which also, I mean, goes hand in hand with racism.
Also like medicalized torture with like racist undertones. Like there was a lot of like medicalized torture experimentation on Black people and people of color that was like, you know, like the entire origin of gynecology was like this racist white doctor was like, oh, Black women don't feel pain, so I can perform experiments on the like gynecological experiments on them without anesthesia. And like a lot of good came out of that because like gynecology has saved a lot of lives and like helped a lot of people, but it's like, you know, there's clearly a cost to that.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to medicine, this is such a fact. Like, if it weren't for us torturing animals for 100 years, we would probably not live past 60 right now. But now we live up to 95 thanks to animal experiments, from medicine to cosmetics to everything. So yeah, our society does rely. Yeah, exactly. And humans, exactly. Our society does rely on this.
I mean, I feel like philosophically it kind of introduces another aspect of utilitarianism, which is like, because they are aware of the child's suffering, they're like, okay, we're not going to take our lives for granted because this child is suffering so that we're allowed to be happy. Which like, okay, chill, but you could also like be aware of suffering in the world and take actions to minimize the amount of suffering that you cause and the amount that you're complicit in it. And that also like helps everybody be happy, but it doesn't require a scapegoat.
Like, it requires reform for this to change. Because there's no easy way to help. Everyone should be in on this change and everyone should accept the change.
When you look at it as like a metaphor for racism or another big like societal problem, like getting rid of slavery did shake up the country, obviously.
Yeah, no, it ruined a lot of things for a lot of people, I imagine.
Yeah, and a lot of people's lives were ruined because they had to give up their slaves. Which sucks for them. It's life sucks for them, but obviously worth it to end slavery.
Obviously worth it.
But they didn't see it like that. Would you do that to ruin not only your life, but everyone that you care about's lives? And maybe like to work with the trolley problem, like, does it change if there's more than one child? Does it change if it's a child that you used to know? Or does it, you know, if it's not
100 kids? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So why do they need to have this child down there?
Prophecy.
They keep on saying like it's because of the terms, and like, is it basically to have contrast to everything else in Omelas? Is there some kind of spiritual like?
That's what I was thinking.
That's like, okay, you got that child in the basement, right? Okay, awesome.
Awesome, keep him there, dude. Cool. Is he still there? Awesome. All right, I'm coming back tomorrow.
There's one line that hints at maybe it's just because it's in their head, like that line that said, "Yet it is their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of the splendor of their lives." So, like, it's not actually the child being down there that's the source of splendor in their lives. It's, like, the fact that they felt sad and angry and, wow, I'm just moved to generosity, but I'm helpless in the end. Like,
I can't do anything, though.
I think there's a couple things on that. I think, like, that line kind of alludes to, like, my grandmother used to be like, you should feel lucky because so many people have it worse than you do. And it's like, I kind of hate that.
No,
but like hearing it, especially as a kid who is just like, I want a Nintendo DS Lite, you know, there's more important things in the world, and like you have no idea how good you have it, and like I didn't as a 6-year-old.
Of course not. Well,
we're not supposed to. Like, a 6-year-old mind cannot process that information or like feel responsible for the like terrible things in the world.
Yeah. Especially since they normalize things so much, a kid, like, even the kids that are like born up in war zones, I have friends that were brought up in war zones and they didn't know that life sucked. They're just like, this is just what life is. Like, that's just how life works. Oh, it doesn't work everywhere else? Oh, I see.
But I think that like that's part of it. So it's like they're running on that philosophy. Like, well, even if life in Omelas doesn't feel that great, at least I'm not that kid, which makes life like which makes you more grateful and whatever. Understanding how bad life could be.
Also, like, I saw this sign the other day that was like, basically, spring wouldn't be so good if winter didn't suck so hard.
Right.
So I think it's that too, like the negative emotional response like leads them back to the happy contentness and even like elevates it probably for some people.
Absolutely.
It also
says
like
theirs is no vapid, irresponsible happiness.
It seems like it gives them a sense of obligation. Like they've been basically like given this sacrifice, and so they need to make the most of it. And it talks about how it's like also responsible for their art and technology and everything. So it's like, well, like this child is suffering down in that basement, so I need to like do something to make the society better, to make the most of that sacrifice.
But there's a sense of societal goal. There is a societal, let's say, direction or something, some level of common understanding, which definitely pushes people, especially since this is such a morally grounding source. Like, you can hear about bad things happening, but no, this is just a horrible thing. So you need to base all your understandings of society off of this, and you learn this at a very ripe age of 8 to 12. So your life perspective usually is shaped probably by this in this society.
I liked Allison's quote, like, you were given this sacrifice, so you should make the most of it. It kind of reminds me of that, like, you know, like, honor the animal that you killed, use every part of it, you know, don't let any piece go to waste kind of thing, where it's like, it's a necessary suffering to like help my people live and whatever. That's kind of like a respectful understanding of pain.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I do like that perspective, to like take that same perspective to slightly different context. Like, countries send people to war all the time, and a lot of the countries' safety and comfort depends on these wars. And we have a lot of people that come back from these wars and a lot of people that die in these wars. But very few people that, this is a bit, I don't want to generalize this because, for example, back home we have a different perspective to this. But I've noticed in America there is disrespect towards these people. And not only are these people sacrificing their lives in so many ways, like get traumatized, they get injured, they become unemployable. Some of them simply don't come back. Yet people don't seem to be making the most out of their sacrifices and kind of taking these sacrifices for granted. Which, you know, this is not necessarily touched upon in this text, but I find that is definitely a factor.
I also find a difference in the fact that, like, that, okay, so you make you're respecting the sacrifice that something makes for you, but it feels like there's a difference between respecting a sacrifice and respecting a lifelong trauma. Like, that sacrifice is different to me. It feels different than giving up your life. And so, like, and that speaks to what you're talking about, Murat. It's like, I feel like in the United States, people can be like, yes, honor our troops. We respect the troops who fall in combat. We are not going to do anything to like help support the VMA and like do anything to make these veterans' lives better, because it's different for some reason, but it's not. And that seems like something that should be addressed. And in this case, it just feels weird to, I don't know, it's like the biggest thing in the story for me is the fact that it's not like, oh, and I was thinking about this in response to the lottery, which I know you didn't read, Murat, but like in the lottery. So the lottery was the book we read last time, or the short story we read last time. And the idea was that, okay, so it's like a different chill society, except that they have a lottery, and every year they like do a lottery and someone gets picked and they get stoned to death. As a way of maintaining
I've heard of this.
Like, thinking about it in that way, if that actually did maintain their society and keep them up, then it's like, it's still bad, because killing people is still bad.
Yeah, they like, because that's still one person every year.
That's true.
But it's like, they're all complicit in it, but they also all kind of take their responsibility because they're all eligible to be the one to take on that sacrifice.
Yeah, the pain is spread out, like you were saying earlier. Like, everyone has a shot at dying or having their family die. So it's not just like all the pain isn't on one person, it's spread out equal.
Yeah.
And it's
But
hard to
every year I was like, yo.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really difficult to like compare different amounts of pain and different amounts of suffering, and that's not like a thing that I think is a very comfortable conversation to have. But it definitely just struck me as like the length and extent of the suffering felt
but then
pretty dramatic.
But then you can also argue that like a lot of the suffering is borne by the families of the people that are killed in the lottery.
Yeah. But this child, according to the text, remembers its mother and like was a part of the society too.
Well, and that almost makes it worse because like when they're like, this child could never like know happiness. It's like it kind of does because it remembers what it was like being cared for and loved. And now it's stuck in this filthy room with mops in it.
And the fact that it's 10 years old means that everyone in the city knows, like everybody in the city knew this kid. And they just like, they decided to do it.
Yeah, for God knows what reason, that's not even explained. So like, I kind of like bring back what Phoebe said when she asked like, why did they have this child? It's like, yeah, why? Like, what happens when you take the kid out? Because maybe nothing. Maybe this is just some bizarre, how do I say it? Superstition there.
Speaking to, I think it's what you were saying, Murat, about utilitarianism. The fact of the matter is that like, okay, so their city goes away. They don't have like these great festivals. They don't have like their music's not as good and their architecture sucks.
It's like, no, not my notes, man.
Yeah. And it's like, okay.
Prosperity and beauty and delight of Omelas would wither and be destroyed.
Yeah.
Those are
But like, if everybody turns their happiness down like 2% and they are like stupid shepherds and they're just like chilling and still enjoy life, but just don't have the same level of like civilization and technology, like is it
right? Because
it says, exchanging all the goodness and grace of every life in Omelas for that single small improvement of the one child, to throw away the happiness of thousands for the chance of the happiness of one. Which doesn't make any sense. Like,
I don't understand it.
Why would you ruin your day to let this kid like take a bath?
Okay, so I think that like it's a valid point, but I also think like, why are these 5 people tied to a trolley line? Like, it's set up to the discussion. But that said, if it's all superstition, so was the lottery. There's a line in the lottery where they're like, oh, lottery in June, good harvest comes soon. We've been doing this forever, whatever. And so like, it is possible that this child, like there's been a different child every 5 years or whatever, you know, and like, that's just how they've always done it. And maybe if they stopped having the child there, nothing would change, but maybe it would. And I think that that's, again, how you, like something horrible like slavery. It's like, maybe if we get rid of slavery, everything will be fine. Maybe the country will collapse. And it's like, how is that worth the risk for you? Some people, yes, some people no. And so
like, is it worth taking on that risk for everybody else? Because if anybody chooses to act on it, then they're putting everybody's happiness at risk, not just their own.
Yeah. So you have to police people too. As the story of Adam and Eve goes, someone is eventually going to feed this child because they're going to be curious. Enough time is going to pass where someone's going to question the reality of this. And eventually enough generations will happen where someone eventually will be, okay, why are we doing this? And that's when I guess the quote unquote the truth will come out. Because I feel like whenever, at least like in our human psyche or human mentality, or at least like human-based literature, whenever this kind of thing comes up, eventually humans open the box. Eventually humans eat the apple. Eventually humans free the slave, whatever. Like, you know, they do something. So it almost feels like this bizarre cave allegory where like humans are living in this bizarre utopic world. And it's just a matter of time until they walk out. The ones that do walk out choose to do so individually. And I guess those are the ones that really see the truth or whatever. Because maybe this society is like, you know, like some bizarre Truman Show thing where they're like, let's see what they do when we give them all this money, but we torture this kid. And it's a bizarre TV show and people love it, like God knows. But I do feel like it is the natural direction of things. And this has been tackled many times before.
I got a stronger connection originally to like sacrifice of Jesus for the good of everyone, the cleansing of all sins. But then I looked back because I remembered there was this religion yes, clergy no line. And then the line right after that is surely the beautiful nudes can just wander about offering themselves like divine souffles to the hunger of the needy and the rapture of the flesh, which does bring us back to the Garden of Eden, I feel like.
Yeah.
I also thought I think that like the difference there is that his sacrifice, like he knew and did it on purpose, like as a choice. And like this child, it seems, was just kind of thrown into the situation. And then I was trying to think like, that is, I don't know if that's more like Eden or more like Job or something. But there's probably someone we could tie him to.
Who's Job?
Job was in the Bible, and he was just basically tortured for like 50 pages. And then God was like, good job getting tortured.
You're a good kid.
You did it.
Yeah. Damn, I see.
That was kind of like, was it Abraham who God was like, sacrifice your son? And he was like, and then he brought his son up to the mountaintop, and God was like, just kidding. But it was like the knowledge that the suffering could exist that made it possible for the suffering to not exist.
Jesus also came to mind for me. And like they talk about in Christianity how like he was perfect and like he's this unblemished lamb, like given willingly for sacrifice. And then out of that sacrifice for your specific sin, you are then motivated to live this life that you were talking about before, Allison. Like
you like have to take full advantage of that sacrifice.
Yeah. Whoa. Wow. What he has done for me. I have to live every day in gratitude for that. Wow. If he could lay himself out on the cross for me and be tortured for 6 hours, sure, I can go give 10% of my money to the church or whatever. The willingness is a huge difference, Christina. Like, Jesus knew what he was doing, and the eternal fate of literally every human being ever versus like 10,000 people like having a nice horse party.
Nice horse party.
Also, he like came back and like ascended to heaven. So
yeah, kind of worked out for Jesus.
Yeah, it ended well.
It's pretty mistakes, honestly.
Temporary suffering.
That always felt a little like weird to me. It's like, yeah, I mean, I guess he's like suffering for a while, but also he knows he's gonna live forever. So like, how much of a sacrifice is it? It's literally just 7 hours of pain, you know.
Breaks the rhetoric.
Like if one of the Greek gods like jumped in front of an arrow for somebody and was like, "I'm sacrificing my life for you," and then just kidding, they pulled the arrow.
I just like sitting coffee in the corner, like, yo, so you remember yesterday I died for you? Okay, cool.
The church that I was in, when we would learn about the cross, like, I mean, of course, growing up in church, you are learning about Jesus died for you a million times. When you study it on your own, they want you to feel it here. And so they're like, okay, Jesus died for you. And you have to kind of like absorb it and like feel bad and cry. One time,
you wrote up all the sins that you've committed.
Yeah, you literally write down all the sins that you've committed and then like confess studying the Bible with you. I could talk a lot about this. One thing that is relevant here is someone once came up to me and was like, so is it bad if I feel like, all right, like one guy for everyone ever? Like, that's not a bad trade. Like,
it's certainly a better trade than the Omelas trade. Like you said, it's like one guy for every human ever, billions and billions and billions of people, or one child for 10,000 Omelas as horse parties.
Well, also it's one guy for everybody's eternal life as opposed to
like their soul.
One guy who was sent here specifically for this reason, chose it, was chill with it, and I was like, this is fine.
And then suffered for 6 hours as opposed to a whole lifetime.
And then is exalted for billions throughout the entire history of humanity from then on as like Best guy ever.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, best guy ever. You know the truth. Has buildings on buildings built on his name. Minions and statues. Like,
Yeah.
we honored him pretty right. We honored him pretty well too. Like, he was well respected.
Statues are there or churches are there for child of Omelas who's afraid of the mops?
Seems
Right.
like none.
It almost feels like it was like a school trip that people do once and then most people don't think about.
Yeah.
Just kind of forget about it. Like,
Yeah, it's like if you had a school trip to like a slaughterhouse and then on your way home swung by McDonald's. Like
that's what's happened. Yeah, actually, it's such an accurate analogy.
how in our society it's kind of different because it's more like many suffer to support the like excess of a small number. I was like, what if we just locked Bezos in a closet and took all his money and fed the poor?
I love that this Bezos a recurring theme now.
It's like
Bezos is
We really made it when you out of this man.
the Bezos hate cast.
If you think about like an ultra billionaire tax that tax like just the top tippity top 10 people or something like that, it would be like, okay, we're just going to take those people and make them live like still an extremely comfortable life.
Yeah.
And it's not
They
putting them in
probably-
the closet
They
with
probably
mom.
won't even notice because what are they doing with all of this money?
Nothing.
Going
I mean,
to Mars.
honestly, they don't even have the money. It's just houses, bro. It's not even money they have. It's just like, I own this thing that costs that much. Like, it's not like they even have this money to spend. They just have things that have worked that
Three
much.
of
Like, it's
Bezos'
nothing,
houses into homeless shelters, and then we'll be all right.
honestly.
Like the freedom of that one person is not worth like the happiness of many.
Yo.
Well, and I guess that like it's kind of a matter of scale, both in terms of like the amount that you're trading for, like the amount of loss that you're trading for gain. Like in terms of like taking a couple of Bezos's billions and using it to fund social programs would not necessarily cause him any suffering, but it would ease a lot of suffering. But like
This is bizarre,
in
no?
Omelas, it's like this child was in extreme suffering, and like we can't really say how much happiness it really caused because like even comparing, I mean, obviously in our society there are kids that suffer that much because like you know shit happens, but if it was like
after this conversation,
like the general level of happiness in their society, like clearly it's not ideal, but like is, I don't know, the like difference between us and like the happiness in Omelas, is it worth it?
Yeah, and I think that that's a good point too. Is that in our society there are lots of kids who do live like this. So maybe
Like maybe at like border camps or you know.
That's what.
yeah,
that's
right.
what I wanted.
So like if you're trying to make a moral argument, then you can also make the argument that literally if you were just going to make it be what our society looks like instead of this Omelas place, then it's like, oh, then you were just making, like, by freeing this child, you would just make a bunch more of this child.
I've always been really disappointed by the end of every dystopian book because it's always like, and now we have democracy. And it's like,
and it's all.
like, so you have this, like, you came back to what I know doesn't work that well. Like,
Exactly.
They never.
I don't think our society is really like that democrat. Like we're not like a full democracy.
Meaning, like, they don't find a better solution than what we are already trying to do. And it doesn't work when we're trying to do it. Like, there's no, it's all just like, you know what works? What already exists. Honestly, I think it's propaganda. But,
100%. 100%.
yeah.
I think it's just like, it's either people who are like, well, this is my society and I'm okay, so then it's the best. Or it's people like Ayn Rand who are like, well, this is my society and it doesn't work, so I have to go full swing the other direction. That's probably good.
Which kind of makes sense, like, especially in that area of dystopic novels. Like, everyone's afraid of communism. So take the worst case extreme of communism and compare it to America at its best. Which one? America looks pretty good. America
Not
looks
even,
pretty
I
good.
feel like it's usually comparing it to, like, the fantasy of what America could look like if
I suppose.
Just like dreamed about it.
I suppose. That's the American dream. Compared to the American dream.
Exactly.
The case scenario, like, it's just fundamentally wrong.
It kind of feels like no matter what system you're in, whether it's good or not, depends on who you are in the system. So, like, if you're an Omelas, it looks pretty great, unless you're that kid, in which case, sucks.
Yo. And, like, kind of like so I kind of like that Elsie brought up Jeff Bezos. Not that I'm trying to hate on Jeff Bezos. He's just a person who cares. He's weird. But we have these two extremes, right? There's Bezos' extreme, and then there is this kid's extreme. Now, if both societies, there's a lot of dysfunctional things. But in one society, people will choose to ignore this kid because people are watching for their baseline of life quality. But in our society, people look up to Jeff Bezos, even though a lot of people do hate him. And I feel like one of the reasons why we don't treat Jeff Bezos in this manner, where like, no, he can help everyone, is that a lot of people hold on to this hope, especially this like American dream mentality of you can be your own, create self-made billionaire, whatever. Jeff Bezos stands as like almost like a beacon of hope for a lot of people. So a lot of people are actually hesitant to treat Bezos in that manner instead of taking like kind of treating this Bezos person like this kid. Though if we did, it would benefit the whole more. But there's a chance that I'm going to be Bezos. So I am going to look up to him. Therefore, if anything happens to Bezos, that breaks my dream.
Even though they're infinitely closer to the mop closet than they are to Bezos.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's absolutely fixed.
Yeah.
Absolutely fact.
It's almost like, and we're flashing forward. There's a little foreshadowing to Dante whenever we get to Dante, but it's like
hell yeah.
every person on every tier of hell is like, well, at least I'm not in that one.
Yep.
And it's like, you know, in Omelas, it's like there's two tiers. There's one child here. Well, I guess there's three. There's one child here, and then there's everybody here, and then there's some folks who are just like, nah. But in real society, it's much more like the tiers of hell, where everybody rung above somebody else is like, well, at least my life doesn't suck that much.
Right.
Or they look up to the higher tier and they're like, well, like, it sucks that I'm not there.
Actually, I never thought of Dante in that sense. So that's cool. Thanks for saying that.
What I think I want to pivot on is like most of the story, like you mentioned, Marat, is trying to prove to you that this society could exist without suffering. And as the author points out, you can't believe it. You're like, no, like there must be something wrong with this place. And you're right, there is. And so I think that brings to question, like, is joy possible without suffering? And like, could we have a utopia like Omelas looks like from the outside?
But like, ultimately, the moral of the story is that the knowledge that suffering exists is what enables this society to exist. But the knowledge that suffering exists could exist without this child. Like, they could just tell stories about what life is like outside of Omelas and say, like, everybody out there is suffering and destitute and starving and has to run away from wolves every night and is freezing. And, like, we are allowed to be here because, like, we just by luck of our birth. And so we have to make the most of it. And, like, is it necessary to actually witness the suffering to believe that it is possible?
Well, if they're still suffering outside of Omelas, is that...
Well, but it doesn't matter whether it exists or not. It only matters whether people believe it exists.
I mean, I guess that makes me think of this line that specifically is like, do you believe? Do you accept the festival, the city, the joy?
Yeah. But, like, what if the child in the closet was, like, a deep fake? Or what if the child in the closet was a robot? Like, would it matter?
Right.
Does the suffering need to exist for the joy to exist? Or is it just enough that people believe that it exists?
I really like that twist. Sorry, go on.
That's all right. I think that there's a difference, though, between, like, watching a documentary of a factory farm and just hearing the fact that, like, oh, they keep 10,000 chickens in 100 square feet. And you're like, I can't even, like, picture that. Like, okay, I guess that's bad.
Well, yeah, but, like, the documentary is still storytelling.
Right, but the point being, like, seeing a thing, because, like, all the kids have to go down and see the kid. So it's like, you see it. You see how bad this kid has it. Is that important? Or can you just be told the story and accept it?
This depends on the imagination of everybody involved.
Right. And also just like, I kind of like that twist that Allison brought up about the kid being a robot.
Yeah.
This whole thing could entirely be fake, and it just might be a bizarre societal scheme to make everyone appreciate what's going on. Because maybe they're saying all these great things, but maybe there's something fundamentally wrong that they kind of are brushing over. Maybe they have like no healthcare, like people just die all the time, but they don't want to bring any kind of societal problems up. So they're like, how about this kid? This kid sucks. Your life is great. Think about that. I kind of like that twist. I think that's a clever twist.
If they replace this kid with a robot, would their society continue to be awesome? In which case, literally, it's not about the child at all. It's just about everybody who comes through the field trip and sees this child. It's not about some gods being like, wow, awesome. You have...
Wow.
Which I think is definitely an option because, like, the problem with, like, the American dream is always wanting more. Because, like, you won't be happy. The American dream chaser won't be happy with the white picket fence. They also need the 40-inch flat screen TV, and that isn't good enough. Now they want the 60, and they want this and this and this, and 2 cars and a vacation home. And it's like the reason the American dream doesn't work isn't because people are actually miserable. It's because, like, there's always something more they want. And so maybe, as opposed to getting rid of those steps, maybe it just, like, knowing that there's a deep level that you are not on, and you're instantly above that. I don't know, like maybe just knowing that you're not on the bottom makes you happy.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a baseline.
Well, ties back to racism as well for me, like how poor white people were pinned against black people.
Yeah,
like a little
at least I'm not black kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm not the lowest rung anymore because even though I'm poor, I'm still white.
I see, which is honestly still evident.
Yeah.
So very much evident and like
Very much so.
factual too.
Yeah, I read a book, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book, like his fiction, The Water Dancer. And there was a line in there that was like, the poor white folks were like the closest to the slaves or the recently freed black people, but they were like the most racist of all of them because they like had to treat the black people worse to keep their like small semblance of power, which is like a powerful idea to take in.
When the author writes that, like, it literally doesn't matter what level of technology they have, what comforts they have, like, they're happy. It doesn't matter whether they're like this far advanced space age society or whether they have basic needs met, like, because this child's suffering is so absolute, like, they're happy. And their technology and their architecture and their art and works of literature like appear so much greater in contrast to the suffering.
I kind of like that, like there's a baseline that they've established and they've accepted as a society, which helps them move forward, helps them live. And like, I think Christian, you read Invisible Cities, right?
Yeah.
So y'all read Invisible Cities or heard about it? It's like, this is basically Brothers Grimm of Italians wrote this book called Invisible Cities, where it's like, it's a conversation between the Mongolian Khan and Marco Polo, where Khan is really sick and Marco Polo is just like telling him about fake cities just to like, entertain him. The Khan knows that these are fake, but he rolls with them. There was this one city that the city is built on these strings between these 2 valleys. And the city is in whatever state it is, but they know that a whole city cannot be supported by strings forever. But for the time being, it is supported by these strings. So people, instead of being in constant anxiety of the city falling apart, they accept the fact that there will be a day where everything will just simply fall out of nowhere. And the fact that they have accepted their end helps them live blissfully. They can just focus on today. I'm alive today. I'm grateful. And I like that mentality where, like, I feel like this story is in some way similar, where, like, yeah, things are great as it is the way it is right now. And we have to appreciate today because we don't know what the future brings in that sense. And I know, I still do fully believe that at some point this kid will be freed and they'll see the truth, if there is one. And there is a sense of, like, not impeding, but like inevitable doom that you can process, especially if you're exposed to like, a certain age. That helps you reach some level of zen because you accept, I guess, your death, you accept the end. Which I don't know. I feel like that on its own can really justify a lot of societal standards, no matter what state your life is in, no matter what state your society is in. If you do accept the end, it makes everything okay in a way.
That's also ties back to religion, I feel like, because a lot of religion is so focused on after death, gaining a good situation after death. And it's like, are you even focusing on the present, or you're just focusing on your after death moment?
I like that you brought that up, just because, like, how brilliant is it, the concept of heaven and hell? Like, I think it's such a clever idea. I'm not gonna say if it's real or wrong. I don't know. Not my thing to say. But just taking that as an idea to present to people, like, there is this freaky thing, death, that no one can process. How about we guarantee something after? Depending on the way you lived out, your death is decided. And that on its own, a person that does good deeds their whole life with the assumption of going to heaven afterwards will live probably a lot more pleasant life, assuming the end is good. Which I feel like will push a lot of people.
And in ways that are a lot more pro-social too. Like,
right.
If I believe that I will get into heaven by helping other people, then our society is going to be a lot more successful because everybody's like putting the work in to help everybody else.
Yo, like that's one thing that I couldn't get annoyed. Like I don't want to be like all like anti-atheist, but I get frustrated when an atheist like, if religion never existed, we'd be like in Pluto by now. It's like, no, bro. Like, I think if religion didn't existed, there's a chance that we wouldn't have the social norms that we have today. Now, I'm not saying religion is great, everything worked out, but I do think that it established a social code in a lot of societies, which helped a lot of people, I feel. Which obviously, I don't have the facts on this, but...
Yeah, I do think it is in large part about control.
Well, there's that. It did become that.
And I also know, like, there are people who are, like, from the teachings of Christianity, like, theoretically, I could accept Jesus and God into my heart when I'm about to die and be forgiven for my sins and accepted into heaven. So that's not actually effectively changing the way that a lot of people are living necessarily.
Like the dude ask of Amontillado.
For the love of God, Montresor.
I think used to like do a lot of good things, and maybe someone's like, oh, I'm gonna go feed the hungry because Jesus said I'm among you as the least of these, like feed my sheep and all this other stuff. But I also think obviously that it's been used to do a lot of bad.
There's no doubt. A lot of wars, especially.
It's like religion is a great impetus for doing good works, but you don't, like, it's not a requisite. And it also is an impetus for doing harmful things to people, but it's not a requisite. Like, you can do great things and terrible things in the name of a higher power, in the name of a country, in the name of your tribe, in the name of, like, you know, really anything.
And I don't think you need religion to be good.
That's for sure true. That's for sure.
Similarly to, like, patriotism. Like, patriotism can inspire people to, like, great scientific achievement and art and athletic achievement, but it also, like, leads people to kill each other and be racist and be nationalist. And it's like, no matter what your belief system is, no matter what your philosophy is, you can use it to justify great things and you can use it to justify terrible things.
I guess, like, the thing with, like, something like religion is that it tackles such a visceral topic for most people, which is death, which everyone experiences in one way or another, and everyone will experience at some point. The level of comfort religion brings makes religious teachings more reliable because they're answering a question that no one has an answer to. At least, like, answering a question that no one has an answer to. So I feel like people do tend to lean towards that way, which I do like certain teachings. I don't like certain teachings. Like, you know, back home, people still sell property in heaven for hell of money. You can buy, like, a nice mansion with, like, a little, like, villa and everything. They can get, like, a garage in heaven. Like, that's totally possible. You know, they got lofts and everything. But, like, a thing that can tackle that question, people will naturally lean towards, just because people do need that kind of comfort. And I find it interesting where, like, you know, humans are such social creatures. And we're supposed to be all, like, society-based. We develop things to society, whatever. We develop things to social relations. But still, our fundamental needs are so individual that people will still choose their own path, even if they have any kind of, like, group understanding, which I feel like is one of the reasons why religion became a way to control people.
I believe fundamentally underlying a lot of evil is like fear and anxiety. Like people do things that are evil, that are self-serving, because they're afraid that if they don't, they won't survive. And so I feel like religion kind of gives them an out where they're like, well, whether I survive or not, I will have this eternal life. And so it allows them to alleviate that anxiety so they don't feel the need to commit evil deeds. But like, it's there's so many things like that where it's like, if I have enough to eat, if I have a roof over my head, if I have everything that I need, there's no need for me to do things that hurt other people because I don't have that fear that if I don't, something terrible is going to happen to me. But I think that's like, was it the Telltale Heart when we were talking about like the need to divorce ourselves from other people's like heinous acts? Like we need to define other people who murder as crazy so that we can differentiate ourselves. It's like, if I didn't have enough, who's to say that, like if I thought that my only option to survive was hurting another person, who's to say that I wouldn't?
Most people would.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, self-defense, if you're trying to escape, if it's you versus someone else, of course.
In fact, it's even justified by law. It's like if you kill someone in self-defense, true self-defense, you actually are not found guilty.
But I think it also like offers a more compassionate lens to people that we see as evil because it allows us to recognize their anxiety at the base of their actions. And that doesn't like justify their actions because there are other avenues out of that anxiety. But
and it's interesting because while these belief systems do provide like a balm to some of these anxieties and fears, like heaven, or like maybe if patriotism is your belief system, that provides you like, okay, here's the American dream. Like you're working towards something great. You can make it here. It also gives you its own sets of fears, like hell, or if you don't like, or in terms of patriotism, xenophobia, like, or everyone's out to get you, or terrorism, XYZ. Like, so while it gives you good things, it also gives you fear. It solves some of the fear, but it gives you more.
Or
there's a lot of baggage.
Other people are coming for like my success and my job position from other countries and economic standing and gender sexualities.
Coming for your jobs.
Oh no, we're outside his way.
One specific thing that I feel like relates to this story is Christian mission trips. People will go on them when they're like teenagers and stuff like that, or even adults. And a common like narrative is, wow, God really opened my eyes and used these people to show me how great my life is and how grateful I should be for that. And I follow this account called No White Saviors, which just completely destroys Christian white missionaries, and it's so fantastic. But anyway, they're like, no one exists for the purpose of making someone else feel good about their life.
Yeah, right? That's not why he was born, bro. It's like, oh, I'm bored? Okay, let me make this guy feel great.
Right.
Let my life suck so he feels great.
There are ways to explain the unexplainable without creating a kingdom of heaven.
Like, without creating the universe in 7 days, you can explain how like we should be nice to each other, you know?
I don't know. The example that comes to mind is like indigenous groups explaining like natural events and stuff.
People find their own ways to explain these. Like paganism is filled with this kind of stuff. And a lot of older religions tend to be a bit more reality-based. Like monotheistic religion is really fantastical. Like it makes sense why that's a modern understanding, because that's really abstract and weird to think, oh, this is one. Like, for example, in Japan, Shintoism, literally everything is a god. Gods, eggshell god, like everything is a god. So to them, like their understanding is like there's value in everything. There's not one great thing that created everything. It's the ultimate value holder, lottery man. Like no, everything is a god, and respect everything for that reason, and no reason more than that. Everything is equal to you in one way or another.
My second example was Greek myths.
Oh, there you go.
I have this like really comforting like philosophy that rather than immortality through an afterlife, like we all kind of achieve immortality by being part of the fabric of humanity, and like each of us is one thread in a tapestry, but all of those threads touch so many other threads, and like there's so much connection between every human being.
I feel like someday I want to just like stitch together all of Allison's wisdom bits.
I promise. I absolutely promise.
And just be like,
I promise, swear on anybody's life that I have not once ever been high during these recordings.
Oh yeah, no, we know, Allison.
Dude,
yo. My brain do. It's like up here.
100 subscribers, Allison's drug reveal. Let's see what drug he's on.
She's got a giant bong right off camera.
I don't have cinnamon tea.
Cinnamon tea? Yo, that's hard shit.
I know there's Drews in there.
Yeah.
I have some Drews.
Drews.
You've been hitting that Drews, Allison. Dude, you Drews, you lose, Allison. Remember that.
No, Allison, this is just like when you were saying that like writing and creation makes people immortal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do support having a video that is just splicing together the insights.
Allison's philosophy of life.
Yeah.
It's
Teach us, wise master.
Like existentialism. I don't know.
You've been dropping some hot fire for the entirety of the year.
In my youth, I had a lot of angst about like not being able to do all the things that I want to do and accomplish all the things that I wish I could accomplish. And then I was like, it doesn't really matter because I'm a human and like I'm connected to all the other humans that are doing all those awesome things.
If I could just be a bit more financially connected to like Mr. Bezos, that'd be really tight, but like
also like as a therapist, I can only like do so much. Like I can only work with so many people and help so many people. And like there's infinite, this is like the opposite of Omelas because there's infinite suffering in the world that needs to be alleviated and addressed. But like I am one small part of a network of like millions of therapists that are all helping people and are all alleviating that suffering. And like, even if I'm just a drop in a bucket, like it is like millions of drops in the bucket that make up a full bucket.
I was so following
it. Hey, I am in a bucket.
You record this shit, you get that shit on there. Damn, dude.
I wanted to tie back to what Phoebe said once about like the white savior complex, and like one of the first things that I tell my writing students is that the minor characters don't exist to serve your main character.
I like that.
Yeah, because a lot of the time that's what happens, and sometimes it's okay. No. Like sometimes you just need a character to like hand your character their coffee in the morning, but most of the time the characters are characters and they have their whole lives going on behind the scenes. But it's like a very amateur, easy mistake to make, to have everyone serve the main character. And this is their girlfriend, and this is their best friend, and this is their teacher, and they don't have anything else going on. But that's not what life is. Like everyone is the main character of their own story.
Also true about life. Everybody needs to figure this out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Teens, because of their developmental, their like brain development, have a really hard time with this, where they're like, well, I'm anxious all the time because everybody's judging me all the time. And I'm like, no, they're not. They're anxious too. They're also like feeling their own shit. They don't give a shit about you because they're the main character of their life. And they're like, what?
It's bizarrely self-serving to think that people think about you that much.
Yeah.
Like you think about yourself so much that you think people think about you all the time. It's like, no, dude, like really get out of your own head. You will be happier. Everyone's got shit. Everyone's got shit. And speaking of like a literature example, like Patroclus in the Iliad functionally was Achilles' beef juice. Like get him hyped up, which is why this book is just so good. Not sponsored. Not
Beef juice?
Yeah.
Beef
Like-
juice.
Yes.
What do you mean beef juice?
Beef
Beefs
juice.
him up. He just gets beefed up.
Beef
By his
salami.
juice. Yeah, dude, just salams him up, dude. And like, because of
Salams him up.
exactly. Some alaikum salam happening. And because of that, things like this book is a good book, which is by
Okay,
y'all.
yeah.
I had another comment about white saviorism, which was I was reading this article about the Choctaw tribe in the United States, like after existing on the Trail of Tears and having all of their land taken from them and their entire life changed. Basically, people came around and they were like, hey, Ireland is suffering. They're having a famine. Can you give them some money? And the Choctaw tribe was like, yes, here you go. We don't want anybody to be starving. And then these white folks were all like, it's such a beautiful indication of the civilizing aspect of Christianity, how the Christian spirit touched these natives and taught them that the spirit of charity. And I was like, or they just didn't want anybody to starve because they know what it's like to be starving, and they wanted to give some money to these Irish folks who were starving. And Andrew Jackson, whose parents came from Ireland, was like, you better give my parents some money because they can't have any food right now. And like these, like just people independently out of the goodness of their heart gave what little they had to support other people. And people were like, oh yes, that's our religion's influence on them.
Oh, yes, that's Christian.
Yes, they gave away their last bit of wealth because we stole the rest from them.
Because we stole the rest.
They learned how great it was when they were poor, so they wanted to be more poor.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Yeah, that was chill. America is not great, but like we are all the citizens of Omelas who are benefiting off of that history, except for Murat.
Yeah.
You got your own history, bro. Don't act too happy.
Japan and Turkey did some shit.
Oh, we did. Oh. Oh man, dude. Oh no, the Ottoman Empire has got some dirt.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes.
It says that no one in the city has guilt,
Damn.
but they would suddenly get guilt if the child was brought up. Yeah.
No,
They
because
cried.
no, I have a theory on this. It's because basically they all must live with the belief that they are like not squandering the sacrifice, and so they like are so convinced that this is a necessary evil that they don't feel guilt about it.
Mm.
But
They're
they
like-
do. They like go home and cry and they're enraged.
Hmm.
But it's like pity, but they're like, well, it has to happen. It's not my issue. It's
Yeah,
not
like,
anything that can be
it's not-
solved.
On them specifically.
Ugh.
Like guilt is a instructive emotion because it's like, here's what you should do differently. But they're like, there's nothing we can do differently. There's no
Mhm.
purpose for guilt.
Hmm.
They can be stirred to pity and cry for this poor child, but they don't feel guilt because they're like, it's necessary.
Right. I feel like they would feel guilty otherwise.
Do the
Didn't
ones
have the kid.
feel guilt?
Yeah, I think so. I think that might be part of it. They're like,
Mhm.
Omelas has no guilt because everyone who feels the guilt can't stay. They have to leave because they can't bear the guilt of it. If you were to fully feel the guilt of what this contract is, you would not stay.
And interesting, like, again, connection back to our discussion about the lottery is that I figure, so like if they brought this child up and tried to rehabilitate them, then it's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy wherein if it doesn't destroy the whole city, actually, like if meteors don't fall and like the whole thing gets destroyed immediately, then they will feel guilt, and all of them will feel guilt, and their society will collapse because everybody will just have that psychological trauma.
Yeah, because they did that for
Oh, we just did this for no reason. In a
Mhm.
similar way to how it is impossible or extremely difficult for the people in the lottery to make the choice to stop that tradition because they have to accept the fact that it was wrong, and they do feel guilty about it. It's just easier to ignore that and not do it and continue having horse parties.
Cognitive dissonance.
This new Ellison hot fire dropping.
It's like
album next year.
You and Mariah have to have a collab album.
Dissonance, dun, 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 dun. Yo, actually, I got a beat, Miss. You want to make you a beat? Cognitive dissonance. Yo, I got.
Oh, that sounds like a hot beat, though. Cognitive dissonance. Boom, boom, boom.
No, cognitive dissonance would be a flyer name for a techno album.
Yeah, dude. Like the beat is made. I just need to touch the buttons. Like the beat is there.
I am deeply ready for you to drop like the dubstep redub of Get Yourself a Chocolate Toffee.
Get yourself a chocolate coffee. Get yourself a chocolate coffee. Get yourself a little toffee. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah, dude.
I'm not convinced that you know how techno beats work.
That's it. Oh, do you want techno? Chocolate coffee. We'll
workshop it. Don't worry about it. We'll get there.
Like, click, subscribe.
Like this video if you would walk away from Omelas.
Yeah, dude. Like this video. Either way, like this video.
The wildest part is like, would you walk away?
Would you?
If you were part of the society, would you?
Comment down below.
Yes, I would. Every time. When the ship is sinking, that's what I always say. Peace out and click subscribe. Every episode I resubscribe to this channel. Just to make sure.